So welcome to our research presentation on the losers of the ultra-fast broadband, and in particular the social exclusion. My name is Jeffrey and this is my fellow presenter Richard. So today we'll give a brief introduction to the project, the research area, and we'll give a scope for our research essay. We'll then cover off the economic and location exclusions, as well as ending with discussion. So our topic is focusing on the exclusion from the ultra-fast broadband for both economic and geographical reasons. So the main issues that will be covered will be who will be excluded and for what reasons, what factors have brought along this exclusion, what implications do we have right now and in the future, and is there any feasible mitigation? So the scope of our research essay is the brief introduction to ultra-fast broadband and its current infrastructure rollout scheme state. We'll also look at the economic, social and locational information to figure out the prospective exclusion from this new network. We'll also estimate the impact of this exclusion on both businesses and residential users and make estimations of the exclusion moving forward, such as possible unemployment from businesses that are being replaced with new services. And we'll also look at ways that this exclusion can be mitigated. So exclusion by economic situation. The main factors we've come up with include income, the cost of living and the lifestyle choices. And for the impact, there's an impact on both schools and education, as well as businesses and also social. And we also look at the intervention, like whether governments can put subsidies towards enabling more uptake of this ultra-fast broadband and reducing the exclusion. So with income, we'll be looking at primarily the discretionary income of people. So this is the income that they have left once they've paid their bills. So in Auckland, the total income of people is around $26,800 per year. This is for all the people that are eligible to work, that are in the workforce, but doesn't necessarily take into consideration unemployment, which is currently about 6.8%. It was also quite interesting to see the median income by ethnicity. So we've got European at 25,000, Maori and Pacific at 20,000, and also Asian at 14,500. So we'll also be looking at what regions and what ethnicities are likely to be excluded from this ultra-fast broadband. As you all know, the cost of living is going up, so people are being left with less discretionary income and having to spread this across other increasing costs, as well as lifestyle choices. Someone may prefer to smoke and drink than actually subscribe to broadband, so this will also be addressed with exclusion. So with education, there will be new services and technologies. However, there will be the requirement for the actual technology to be present, such as student laptops or tablets. Who should be paying for this, and should it be the schools, should it be the government, should it be the parents? And if it's the parents, does that bring into consideration some pressure? And also, if people cannot afford it, what happens then? Do we exclude this? Do we distinguish this child from other students in the class and provide a different service to them? With businesses, the cost of operating at present time, many of them are on low margins, so this will be a concern for some. However, with the price being similar to the current one, it shouldn't be too great. However, there are still businesses out there that are operating on dial-up and some without internet at all, so this will still be an issue. As well as the loss of competitive advantage as their competitors take up ultra-fast broadband and take on these new services. We also have social impact of exclusion, such as the internet becoming a greater social hub with new and greater roles in our social lives. This will lead to potential social exclusion and mental impacts.
Alright, so there's also exclusion in the UFB by location. And over 10 years, the UFB initiative proposes that 75% of New Zealanders will have access to the UFB. And by that I mean they'll have access to the roadside cabinets. They won't necessarily be on the UFB. And that's one of the issues that Jeffrey discussed a little bit. Selection for the towns and cities that would get access to the UFB was made off of population density statistics. The Crown Fibre website cites 33 cities for that. It appears in the Broadband Initiative that 35 cities are listed on the Ministry website. The diagram to your right there has 30, so I'm a bit confused as to how many cities are on it. You can see there's 4 main providers of it, with North Power Fibre, Chorus, Ultrafast Fibre and Enable. And there's an expectation that these cities will represent 75% of the population in 2020. And that's through statistics, population density statistics that are predicted for 2020. With the UFB system, they're prioritising schools, hospitals and health services. And that means that there's priority fibre laid to the schools. There's an expectation that I believe 200 rural schools, for example, will have access to the UFB in 2015. And the UFB initiative states that all your rural schools should eventually get access to the UFB. So my section will look at where the 25% of people are. And right now that's about 1.1 million people. By 2020 that'll be about 1.25 million people, because they expect that the population of New Zealand will reach about 5 million, or just under. So, this is UFB coverage, UFB and RBI coverage for the North Island. These maps are obtained from broadbandmaps.government.nz, so it's kind of a government site that represents all of the main fibre providers and the RBI providers kind of collected together and mapped onto a geolocation service. So on the left you've got the UFB coverage for the North Island. You can see the main cities, Auckland, Wellington, Whangarei, Gisborne, all have good UFB coverage. And on the right you can see RBI coverage for this. You can see a few gaps there, particularly up around the Bay of Plenty, which is just over here, which I'll talk about a bit later. So some notes on this. It appears at first the North Island is not necessarily well covered in terms of UFB coverage, but I'll talk about why I believe that it is well covered in a second. With the aid of Statistics New Zealand, we can clearly see that the denser regions have good coverage by the UFB, and the diagram on the right here is taken from the Statistics New Zealand website, and it shows the population density for the North Island. So you can see the Auckland region here has a very dense population, and Wellington has a very dense population. And for context, there are 1.4 million people in Auckland, and that's as of 2006, 400,000 people in Wellington, and 206,000 in Hamilton. So that represents a chunk of nearly half of New Zealand at the moment, in those 3 cities alone. So the South Island UFB and RBI coverage, taken from the same website. On the left you've got the UFB coverage projected, and on the right you've got the RBI coverage. I should also mention on the RBI coverage for both the South and North Islands that this includes on the website current residential broadband lines such as DSL over copper wire. So it's kind of more the collection of collection of wireless DSL and the other services available. So you can see that you've got pretty good coverage, pretty decent coverage for the UFB here again. The major cities are all covered, with Christchurch and Dunedin particularly. There are some pretty big kind of chasms here in the South Island of no coverage, but we'll talk about what these mean later. Particularly down here are quite important, I believe. So it appears again that UFB coverage is not extensive, but we can see with New Zealand Statistics data that population density is relatively low in the South Island. And this is kind of evidenced by the fact that 76% of New Zealand live in the North Island. 360,000 people live in Christchurch. Again, 2006 census data said this, and 120,000 live in Dunedin. So you can kind of see that these regions that were not covered well by the RBI are, not dense at all in terms of they've only got up to one person per kilometre, one dwelling per kilometre. So, UFB deployment in the South Island is limited primarily to Dunedin and Christchurch. It's also available in pockets in the smaller cities. Examples of this are Invercargill, Nelson, Greymouth, and Blenheim. This map here is the Chorus map, the Chorus fibre map, showing also their RBI coverage for the South Island, and overlaid on top of that is the population density statistics map from Statistics New Zealand, and that kind of shows these areas are not particularly populated, and they again don't have much coverage. And it also shows, interestingly, these blue dots as the priority users, such as schools. So these places will, in theory, have fibre access. So how will this affect businesses? Clearly, some businesses not included in the RBI and UFB will be disadvantaged further through exclusion when compared to businesses that gain these services. And that's evidenced by lower costs. And there's increased capability, obviously, on the UFB for the same or lower price. It could also be argued, I believe, that the difference could mostly be that the feasibility of businesses that have access to the RBI and UFB increase, but you aren't necessarily going to lose profit as an excluded business. Not in all cases, certainly anyway. But the basic example of a massive advantage here would be that hosting a data warehouse in a residential property would be now possible with the much greater broadband speeds. Or working from home, telecommuting, for example, becomes feasible. So there's opportunity, certainly, but perhaps not necessarily a loss of profit in all cases. For excluded users, that is. So how will this affect residential users? I believe there's a technological gap between users with access to UFB and RBI and those who have no broadband access will continue to increase. There'll be a bigger gap now between users with access to broadband and without access to broadband. Certainly the gap will increase also in the case of people with access to UFB and then those who have access to the RBI. For context, RBI is going to be about 1 to 5, or 5 megabits per second is kind of what 5 megabits or better is what they kind of say on the RBI initiative. Whereas UFB initiative, obviously going 100 megabits or 50 megabits or 30 megabits. And one of the possible spin-offs of this is that there could be less access to video media for residential users, and that could be because the quality of media is going up more and more every year. And there's always a possibility that you'll have less availability of low-quality media for people with weaker connections. Another piece of information to support this is some information regarding the average size of web pages. They're increasing essentially. They're 1 megabyte in size as of 2011 in December, and they were 700 kilobytes in size in December of 2010. So there's an increase of about 30% there in 3 years. That includes, for context, images and any media on the page, as well as the page source itself. So therefore, the web is becoming less accessible to users with slow internet. And we'll talk about that a bit more on the other page. So these statistics were pulled from hdparchive.org. For a dial-up connection, a megabyte would take about 146 seconds for a single page, in this case. What is slow, I suppose, is the other question for this, for an internet connection. I personally have a 1 megabit wireless broadband connection at home, because I live rurally. And that would mean that a page would take me about 10 seconds, just under 10 seconds. When you think about 10 years down the future, 10 years down the track, which is when New Zealand will kind of realise their broadband future, pages could be much, much bigger than that. And rural broadband users are going to have about 5 megabit connections, and in some places, they'll still be on 1 megabit connections like myself. So this means that there could potentially be some pretty big problems there. So to summarise, our research project focuses primarily on those excluded from the UFB, and to an extent those excluded from both the UFB and RBI. And we looked at that both economically and socially. The plan for our essay is to discover and analyse those specifically included, and combine this with the analysis of possible effects of exclusion. And we wanted to look at that both financially and socially. But I'd appreciate any feedback you guys have, and any questions you guys might have now. Any questions? No? Yes?
Yeah. You've presented very well the issues, and you've identified exactly who's losing the UFB RBI connectivity, and you've shown that visually. And you've also shown the internet's growing and the media qualities are going up, therefore the requirement of faster connection is essential. But you haven't actually expressed, so what do you think? The plan that has been that is being conducted now by Crown Fibre Holdings and the LFCs, is that a reasonable plan given that the population concentration and whatnot, or do you think the people that are excluded are really suffering because of this?
Well, I believe,
you know what I mean?
interesting on that point, I wanted to talk about something earlier on about that. The people being excluded are really going to be suffering because the UFB kind of enables the ability, especially for people in those areas excluded, to have kind of both schooling and healthcare. So you could have doctor appointments and things. They're the guys who haven't got doctors around them. These people are excluded. So they are going to really suffer because healthcare can go up, schooling can go up in price. But the issue of where the broadband should be available and where it can be available is more political. And to be honest, New Zealand's not in a state to give everyone, cheap broadband. I don't think. But I mean, that's a matter of opinion on my part. What do you think?
Pretty much the same. So there's no real losing at the moment, but in the near future, it will need to be expanded a lot further. So
as the economy kind of allows, I suppose.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Hi.
What do you think can deal with the technical gap between the user in UFB and outside UFB? Maybe the 4G?
Yeah, that definitely. I mean, mobile kind of coverage is the one way of kind of getting good access to those areas, I suppose, and kind of upping access technology in the unaffected area, in the areas that don't have access to the UBI especially. Anything to add to that, Jeffrey?
Not really, no.
I hope that kind of helps. Thank you. Anything else? Yep.
You talked about exclusion of users. Now, do you have any data about exclusion on the other side? For example, internet providers which have their own infrastructure, and whether they are not used anymore, if people are able to use the ultra-fast broadband.
So you're talking about the existing copper networks and the unbundling?
Yeah, for example, I think Telstar,
They own one in Wellington, I believe, Telstra does.
use their own network and is not partner in any case of the ultra-fast broadband. So do they suffer from that?
As a company, I imagine that it suffered quite a bit, but I haven't seen any specific figures on it. But yeah, Telstra own the Wellington fibre network, I believe, the cable down there.
Copper shouldn't be too greatly affected in the coming future, but it will when the speeds get up to 30, 50 and 100 in those areas, so they will start losing customers if they don't get onto it. But most of them are also ending up onto the fibre.
The copper's primarily owned by Chorus as well, isn't it? And Chorus is a primary they're a primary stakeholder in the UFB anyway, so they're kind of getting their own customers back in most cases, aren't they? As they go off one and onto the other, I hope. Anything else? Yep.
Did you find any example of a business or a particular, let's say, community who is not getting UFB in the present context and can suffer from?
I saw a bunch on the page that I was talking about before, broadbandmaps.govt.nz is a great map system that lets you kind of zoom in and see the communities that haven't currently in the RBI and UFB range. I didn't really have time to go over them, but there were a bunch of them. I didn't get to see any actual cases of communities, talking about how it would affect them. But they're definitely out there. They're not necessarily big towns. I mean, the ones I was looking at, they were only like kind of 5 or 10,000 people at most. I mean, not even that really. Just little tiny companies, towns. Sorry.
as broadband becomes more and more essential part of our lives, then given that a region in South Island doesn't have the quality of broadband that it needs, therefore, do you foresee that people and families are going to say, let's go and settle closer to Christchurch or somewhere in Dunedin because they have the technology, they have the tools for us to learn and to develop our careers, and then they probably, you may face a migration effect that draws people closer to those cities. Then the problem is kind of solved in one way, that more people have broadband, but in another way, people move from these
I think that's a really good point, and especially if things like healthcare and stuff becomes more expensive to people, and it probably already is the case where it's more expensive because they've got to drive to the doctor that could be a great distance away, and not having access to fast internet could mean that it's even worse for those people.
And here comes the Rural Broadband Initiative, which tries to make the services available everywhere, so mitigate this effect.
It mitigates it, but it's not everywhere. The RBI is not everywhere still. I guess it's too expensive to get DSL cabinets out into range of those people, or to get wireless out to some areas I suppose aren't feasible for good wireless coverage as well. Was there another question over there somewhere? No? We good? Anyone else?
Any questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you.